I'm Tony Lockwood, founder of Thompson Wright Partners, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the latest episode of Inside Track, where I discuss business transformation journeys with leading figures in industry. Today I'm delighted to be joined on the podcast by Dr. Jacqui Rigby, a scientist turned transformation leader who shares their experience of how a scientific background has been able to be applied really effectively within the transformation space. I'm sure you'll enjoy what she has to say. Let me introduce you to her now. It's great to welcome you, Jacqui, to the Inside Track podcast. Thanks for agreeing to join us today. Your career has spanned a range of marketing, operations, and change and transformation roles, although it's clear that change has been a significant aspect of all the roles that you've been involved in. But let's start by providing the listeners with a bit of a brief summary of your career to date, really to get the context of what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I've had rather an eclectic career, and I sometimes look back and wonder how on earth I ever got to where I've got to today, but it's been a great ride. Everyone says you should plan your career. I never really have. I've just looked for opportunities, so I'm not sure I'm the best career advice. However, I started out as a scientist, so I did a degree in biochemistry, I did a PhD in molecular genetics in the times when DNA sequencing was quite novel, and stayed in academia until my later 20s, and then realised that I really like talking to people too much because academia is very lonely, and also it's not very customer facing, it's not very commercial, and I sort of realised that I'd missed all those things, so I gave up my time in the lab, which was fun. Used to play five-a-side football with the lads, used to play squash league, used to cut hair in the corner of the lab when we were watching Neighbours on a Friday. Put all that aside and actually went to do some proper work. So I went to the Medical Research Council, then SmithKline Beecham, and that's where I really discovered change, I guess, although it wasn't really called that in those days. So started in market research, trained as a business analyst, and very well trained in a blue chip company. And the career went from there, project management, program management. Then ended up at the Co-op in just in the sort of early 2000s, and loved my time there. And again, fantastic company to work for because you learn so much and you're given great opportunities. And that's when I moved from being sort of sitting in IT and working with the business on change, and actually then sitting in the business and working with IT on change. So I've sat on both sides of the fence, which is relatively unusual in change. So I've owned P&Ls, I got into marketing, I got into product development, I did business development, but I've always done that through a change lens, as you said, Tony. And had a great career at Co-op in funerals and legal services. I was acting CIO for a while for part of the organisation. I did all sorts. And then left the Co-op and ended up by accident, in my usual career way, but by accident, doing my own thing. Somebody rang me up and said, "Are you working yet, Jacqui?" I said, "No." And they said, "Can you come and help me for a few days on this project I'm working on?" So I said, "Yes." Set myself up in business overnight, and the last 7 years is history, as they say. Yeah. So I've done a variety of interim and consultancy and advisory pieces of work across marketing and transformation and change and product, including digital product development. So I don't know, I just enjoy life and enjoy challenges. So I guess that's what's got me where I've got to.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, you two things that you've just said there that that you haven't really planned your career, and what I find in a lot of these podcasts, and also talking to people in project program change management, is that it's never been the plan. People have just fallen into it and really enjoyed it, and then the career's developed in a completely different way. Although I suspect yours is more eclectic than many, to be fair. But the second thing is that there's so many people that I know that have been in the Co-op some stage in their career. But the beauty of the Co-op, for those that don't know, is that it's got so many different businesses, hasn't it? So although the PLC brand is the same, you've got retail, you've got funeral, you've got legal, you've got banking, you've got loads of different business units, haven't you?
Yeah.
And if you've been lucky enough to work across all those different divisions, you've almost got I don't know. You've got the broadness of working across multiple sectors, but still within the same organisation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's really nice to hear somebody who understands the co-op, because people say, well, you stayed in one place for 13 years. And you go, well, no, I didn't, because actually each separate business has got its own subculture. You're all aligned behind the cooperative purpose, but the leader within each of the business units drives their own culture. And each business has got its own challenges. So, as you say, it's hugely different if I'm working in the legal business for funerals, if I'm working across with the bank, I was working with insurance. All those cultures are different, both from a regulatory point of view and a leadership point of view. And I don't think I realised until I left how much value I'd got out of nearly 13 years at the co-op. I was worried I'd be left behind, having stayed in one place for 13 years, but actually it was almost the opposite. As you said, it's the breadth of experience you can get in somewhere like that, particularly if you move across different departments and different businesses, which I did, that actually has made it really fun to then go off and helping lots of different businesses in lots of different ways, drawing on that experience from different leadership styles, different cultures, different toolkits, different processes. And I look back now and I think that was a really good decision going to the co-op.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we always tend to start this podcast with a question. So how do you define transformation?
Yes, it's a great question. And do you know what? I don't get hung up on definitions. But I guess if you were asking me, I'd probably say it's where there's a step change, in summary. And that might be within a function, it might be across a business, but you're going from A to B. You're not just tweaking something around the edge. And I think change and transformation are sometimes interchangeable as words. And some people think that actually it's really important to differentiate them. I'm just not one of those that's just like, the principles are the same.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how big a transformation or change program is, the principles are the same. So, you just get the job done rather than worry about the definition.
I agree. But the question, we raised the question really about putting the context into the rest of the conversation. Because like you said, there are quite diverse definitions out there, and it's fascinating when I did something a few weeks ago and just put transformation into Google, and there was something like 1.4 billion pages.
Wow!
It was, and just anyway.
Yeah.
But one of the things I sort of picked up on your LinkedIn profile was you talk about humanizing transformation. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, it's when I look back at the programs I've worked with and where it's worked well and where I've seen things work less well, I try to put my finger on what is it that really makes the difference, and it is that human element. Whether you look at it, whether you're talking about humans as customers, so you're understanding the customer need and the pain points and making sure that you're meeting those as part of your transformation, or whether it's to do with actually the whole people element of transformation, which is more important than anything else. Transformation often starts in tech, which is always a disaster if it stays in tech. It can start there, but it can't stay there. And the way that I work is holistic. So it's really important that you look at the people, the culture, the processes, the tech, and link that all together in your transformation. And people miss the people side and the culture side. And that's what makes the difference in terms of transformation success for me. Fundamentally, is that human element of the customer and the people, and that's why it's something that just sticks in my heart, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I was listening to the High Performers podcast with Jay Humphries and Damien Hughes a couple of weeks ago, and there was one. The episode I was listening to was with Christian Horner, the F1 Red Bull F1 principal, and he was saying is the one thing that he talks about all the time around performance and high performance is its people. And it's the same, as you say, within transformation. It's all about the people, isn't it? You can put the technology and you can put the process in, but if you haven't got the people to follow the process and to adopt that technology, you get nowhere.
Exactly, and we've seen that a lot. You look at why transformation fails, and fundamentally, it's a human element that's failed. It's the human element of leadership. It's the human element of not engaging people from the start. It's ignoring the people element and doing it to them. It's not engaging them through the process. When I look at why most things fail in terms of transformation, it's probably 99 times out of 100 some human element to it.
Yeah. So what are the key things that you put in place when you're driving change and transformation within an organisation to overcome those typical deficiencies?
Yeah, there's lots, but I guess the three things that I really make sure I focus on is there has to be a vision, there has to be a purpose and a North Star and a story behind the change that you can articulate and the leadership can articulate, and people can get their heads around it and follow a story that makes sense to them and gives them that purpose and vision. So create that vision. The other bit is actually engaging people from the start. It's one of the things that quite often actually people go, oh, no, let's not tell them about anything. We'll go as a transformation team and we'll sit in the war room and we'll sort it all out, and then we'll tell them what they need to do. And that's just the anathema. So what's really important is getting people in the room across functions from day one and getting them to help design the future. And doing that in a workshop style. I mean, you can even do it remotely. It still works remotely. So creating that future together with people, so they're doing the change together, not actually you're not imposing it on them. And then the third thing is that principle for me of looking across all the pillars of transformation. So your technology, your processes, your people, and your culture. And that program has to have all those elements being managed and monitored and controlled, not just the tech, not just the process. Because people and culture tends to come either late in the process or gets ignored, or you get to the stage when you're sitting in a room and the steering group's going, well, they're just going to have to do what we tell them to do, aren't they? If you get to that place, well, you're really going to struggle. So I guess the three principles for me is the vision, getting people engaged at the start, and then that holistic view of transformation. And those principles then, everything else then fits around it for me.
Yeah, I'd sort of I smiled when you were mentioning the example that you gave around let's get in a room and we'll decide what's happening and we'll take it forward. And that happens all too often, doesn't it? It's frightening how often that we get pulled into an organisation to help what we would probably talk about a turnaround situation, but to recover a failing project, and that's what they've done.
Yeah.
And I always talk about the role of a leader in a program or a transformation is to facilitate that transformation. It's not to lead it; it's to facilitate it and bring the people together and take it forward. But yeah, against that clear vision, absolutely. Yeah. Without that, and without having consistency of across the board or across the senior stakeholders, that is the right vision to go to, which is another area that I find sometimes gets in the way.
It does, because you've got you've got personal agendas, you've got that power and control that sits in those sort of silos really. And the thing about transformation is it can provide a threat to certain individuals or certain teams. Either because it might, people worry about losing their jobs, or they worry about having to do things differently, or just fundamentally just the whole process. But the more you engage people from the outset, even if they're sat there with their arms folded initially, the better chance you've got of actually getting them on side. And the leadership style of command and control, leads to that. Let's sit in a room and decide it and then tell them. And that leadership style is starting to die out more and more. So I'm hopeful that transformation programs increasingly will be under leadership which is much more transformational leadership rather than transactional leadership, which should then help transformation be a success.
Agreed. Another area that I tend to find that organisations struggle with, and it'd be interesting to get your views, is that delivery of the value, the expected value from the business case. And there's a whole reason for that, and we can probably spend the next 3 or 4 hours talking about it.
Yeah.
But what things do you put in place to try to keep a track of that value delivery?
It's a really, really good point. And I think, I mean, I've written business cases, particularly earlier in my career, with the genuine belief that actually they were real enough and they were trackable. And then you realize that most of the time they aren't real. They're a set of assumptions on assumptions on assumptions, because there's often no data if you're doing transformation. You've got no proxy.
Yeah.
It's just a series of things which are increasingly wrong. And if you come up with an answer that doesn't make sense in terms of the finances, then you just end up tweaking it anyway. So you're starting in a bad place where you're setting expectations based on made up numbers, which I think is a real struggle. And I haven't got the answer of how you get past that, because then you can track against it. But actually, if you fundamentally it was made up in the first place, then actually that's the root cause of the problem. However, you can't go to a board and just go, oh, trust us, just give us £1 million and we'll build something and it'll be fine. So I think it's a real challenge to actually get under the skin of how you do proper benefits tracking in reality, because if your baseline isn't right, then you're tracking against sand. However, to answer your question, then one of the things that I think fundamentally goes wrong in transformation is the business benefits case is here, and the benefits are measured a long way out in the future. And by that point, actually, a million other things have happened that could have influenced the outcome. And the people who are actually responsible for the program, including the sponsor, have gone on and done something else quite often. So that's the other problem. So what I do is looking for those steps along the way, in terms of how can we give a line of sight that looks like we're on the right track for those benefits, and measure those as early as possible before you even get to delivery.
Yeah.
But again, this is not just about numbers. This is about your people, how your people feeling, how they're responding to change. It's about your processes. It's about your culture, engagement through the program, and it's about your technology as well. So you can set up those interim steps along the way that give you a better line of sight to actually, are you going to get the outcome? And I don't just mean doing a RAG report and doing a risk and issues log.
Yeah.
I mean, setting your KPIs so you've got interim metrics. It's not easy to do, but the principle of it at least gets you further than disconnecting the outcome over here with your business case, which was made up in the first place.
No, I wondered whether or not your sort of scientific background would influence on that, because presumably a lot of this science and new product development must come from a basis of, we don't know, but we're going to try stuff out, and we don't know what the end result will be. But if following these assumptions, it could look like this.
Do you know, you're so right. And when I started working on digital product development, I had that eureka moment of realizing that actually it brought me right back to science. And I'm going to shut the windows because of the planes. One of my favorite quotes is Professor Brian Cox, who I adore anyway. Mm-hmm. And he says, the essence of science is to be delighted to be wrong, because every time you're wrong, you learn something.
Yeah.
And that is, as you say, that particularly in product development, and that's driving some of this more progressive way of change, is that you go on a journey and you combine creativity, ideation with data. So you can set a hypothesis, just like you would do in a scientific experiment. You make it quick and dirty. You don't build the whole thing properly.
Yeah,
you can even just, put boards up and just do, screens that have been created in a couple of days that don't really work. And you can actually take people through and watch what they do and listen to what they say, listen to their tone of voice, watch how they navigate, ask them lots of questions. And you can learn a lot in a 7-day period of doing a quick sprint, which will give you much greater insight of whether you're going in the right direction or not. And that is the complete opposite to the old-fashioned waterfall, where you write a business case and 3 years later you deliver something, by which time the whole world has changed.
Yeah.
And so for me, combining science in terms of data and metrics and monitoring what's going on, qualitative research, which is still data, but it's softer data, and actually that creativity in terms of actually what hypotheses can we try and test. That gets you to an exciting place where you can actually learn as you go along, just like you do in science.
Yeah.
And I love that. It was that light bulb moment when, oh my God, digital product and science, they're the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, you can spend weeks and months trying to produce the perfect plan to get you to this end vision. And a week in, something happens. It takes you completely off track. So why do we waste all that time trying to plan for it? Let's just start moving forward, being clear about where you want to get to.
Exactly.
But not to be too worried about how you're going to get there.
Exactly. And that's quite scary when the first time you do it. I remember the first time that somebody talked to me about that. I found it really scary because it went against everything I learned. It's just like, well, no, you've got to plan it and you've got to have everything, all laid out, and you've got to spend hours redoing your plan every week.
Yeah. But it's what I term the sat nav approach to transformation. Yeah. Because you dial in the destination, don't you? And then you take into account all the traffic as you're going along the road and take a different route.
That's a good analogy. I like that. I'm going to pinch that one, Tony.
So we've spoken about getting the vision right, and we spoke about engaging the people, and we've just been sort of talking about sort of tracking progress and the results or the outcomes that we're looking for. Yeah. What do you do to sort of maintain that momentum? Because some of these programs that we get involved in, as we've just been talking about, multi-year, and maybe the initial sort of enthusiasm to get things going, but then it becomes quite going to the sort of second year, it can become quite a bind, can't it? So what do you do to sort of maintain the momentum?
Yeah, there's probably a couple of things. One is that classic thing about actually celebrating smaller milestones. In the old days, you used to have a project and you only celebrated at the end with the big project party. I think people realised that actually that could be quite a long time and people were worn out by then. So lots of little celebrations, and that doesn't mean spending a lot of money. It can be, just a little get together with some pizza. It can be, a quiz evening. It can just be sending a note round with, naming some successes and individuals. It can be, and also things like show and tell, which again comes from product world. Get people in a room on a regular basis, every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, whatever's relevant, and actually get the people on the program to show individuals what's going on. And not just, the tech side, but, the process side or the people side, or, do some customer vox pops, I mean, I've done some great experiences where you actually engage people in the contact center, because they're quite often the people who are face-to-face with the customer. Yeah. But because they're the most junior members of the organization, quite often they get ignored, completely wrong. Yeah. So get them involved, get them to look at what's being developed, get them in a room, get some quotes from them, share those around the business, put them on the screens on the wall. So you keep it alive by, again, making it human. Sending out lots of data is good for your finance people, and you need that for your program governance, but it doesn't really engage your people. So bring people to the people and show them and make it come to life. And that helps keep it alive. But any more tips you've got, I'm happy to pinch those as well, Tony.
But it's interesting that show and tell is perfect way of just, as you say, stripping back that any long-term transformation is just a series of shorter, as you say, sprints or deliveries. So every time you've got one, take them through what we've done and how you've got there and how they've been engaged. But equally, as they're going through that, again, something that I've sort of tried to put a title against, but show and engage. So that you're not just waiting to the end of delivery and telling them what you've done. You're actually taking them through. Well, we're at this stage. What do you think? And engaging them. And it links back to what you were talking about earlier. Just as you say, getting people more actively involved. And you're right. Was it John Timpson has sort of coined this sort of upside down management, hasn't he? Where actually, as chairman, he's the least important person in the organisation. The most important people are the frontline people. In the case of you just been talking about those call centres, because they get the first-hand experience from the customer.
Yeah, they know what the customer's like. Quite often, the people doing the transformation programme have never spoken to any of the customers of that business.
Yeah, absolutely. And you say that the leaders of the sponsors of the change tend to be so far away from the front the front line. They're probably, I'm not saying in every case because but in a lot of cases they've been away from the front line for so long. In their mind, it's still as it was 10, 15 years ago, and things have moved along massively.
Yeah, and people struggle. I mean, it's really hard. People struggle to actually put themselves in the shoes of a customer who isn't like them. Well, I like this, and therefore, why don't our customers like it? Or isn't that what our customers want? And actually, you go, well, you're a completely different. You've got completely different attitudes and beliefs. You're a completely different age. You're a completely different life stage to the target customer. So why would you think that actually that's what they want? Let's go and talk to the customer, shall we? And let's see. I don't know either because I'm not a typical customer. Well, let's go and talk to the customer.
Yeah. And again, presumably that's your product development piece, isn't it? Because something similar, I suppose, a good few years ago now, but it was just at the start where sort of technology was really starting to come in and handheld devices and apps and all that sort of stuff. And there was a piece of work that was being done in a support services organisation, but it was looking at handheld devices. And senior team were like, well, why do we need to do this? Couldn't really understand. So that they could understand the mechanics of it, and they could understand the economic benefits of it and the trackability of the data. But they couldn't understand why we needed to invest a lot of time and effort in getting the user, the usability of the app working properly. And we just did that. We went to the front line, the people of a certain age that were employees.
Yes.
It's okay. What do you think about this app?
Yeah.
And they were like, it's like 20-year-old technology. We want more modern stuff. And it's swipe right and all that sort of stuff. And suddenly you're getting that sort of feedback from the people that are using it, and that was so valuable. And ultimately cost a little bit more than the original business plan was, but saved a fortune because all that initial investment would have been wasted because it just wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, I mean, it's as you say, I remember one of the things I very first learned when I was being trained as a BA and into project management is your analysis is the most important bit of your program in a classic sort of waterfall, because it's understanding your requirements. And you translate that through, and it's the equivalent now is actually you need to understand your customer, because actually if you understand your customer, what their pain points are, what their needs are, hypothesize how you might be able to solve them, put something in front of them that's quick and dirty, test it and learn from it. That's the equivalent. And the more time you spend actually doing that, the more successful you'll then be, because you're de-risking your investment further down the line, because you're investing in understanding something that really attracts the customer. I mean, it's a classic case of the 3D TVs. So they pumped loads and loads of money into 3D TVs, and they went on sale and nobody bought them because nobody wanted to sit with 3D glasses in front of the TV at home. Now you go, that looks like a classic case of, well, let's give them something that's high tech that they're bound to want, aren't they? And they don't know they want it. And that went wrong. Then the opposite. And of course, Apple have done well, let's put something in front of them that actually they haven't asked for. And of course, the rest is history again, as they say. So if you take the route where you don't actually seek input from customers, you can get it horribly wrong, but occasionally you'll get it very right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But again, it's that minimum viable products, isn't it? It's just, let's get something out there that's quick and dirty.
Yeah.
Test it out, and if there's a market, then you can invest in it. And it's that it's the same principle in innovation, isn't it? It's fail fast. Let's just try something out, get a minimum viable product, see whether it works. If it doesn't, we've been it. But we sort out the ones that are the flyers.
You've learned from it. It's just the same as same as any sort of scientific experiment. Failure is a good thing, because actually you've learned something, you've excluded something. But I mean, even when you've launched a product or you've tested a product in research in its very early stages, it doesn't matter that some things weren't liked. It actually matters that that they weren't liked. That's what really matters. And that really challenges, again, sort of more sort of classic leadership, of actually failure is a bad thing.
Yeah.
It drives me mad when you see leadership that actually focuses on failure, and you get down to witch hunting individuals. And actually, failure is something to learn from. And as long as you learn, I always say to people when I have a new team, I always say, you can make a mistake, not bother, just come and tell me, so that I don't, it's not a surprise to me if my boss mentions it to me. That's fine, but we'll talk about what you've learned from it. If you make the same mistake again, we might have a slightly different conversation.
Absolutely, yeah.
You have to fail, otherwise you're not going to learn, and you're not taking enough risks if you don't fail.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you don't fail, you're not pushing the boundaries, are you?
You're not.
So, and if you don't push the boundaries, you don't make the big leaps.
Exactly, which is your transformation.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah, it's the same principle of you would never slap your child down, would you, because they were trying to walk, and every time they fell over, you tell them off for falling over. It's like, no, you're encouraging them to stand up and fail, and because every time they try, they'll learn a little bit and they'll get the balance, etc. It's interesting how we react to one thing in one way in one part of our life, and then completely ignore that core concept in another part of life. And as you say, the challenge is a lot of the time is within organisations, failure is frowned upon as opposed to being celebrated almost.
Yeah,
but I suppose to some extent it depends upon the type of failure.
It does, yes. I mean, obviously, there are certain circumstances that actually, there are severe consequences sometimes, which mean you end up in jail. But
but I think even those, having said that, I'm arguing against myself now. But even those, if you what I think what tends to happen is that they've noticed something going wrong early doors, but didn't put the hands up, and then tried to hide it, and kept it going, and a failure on a failure on a failure becomes a very big failure. Where if they'd had a culture where failure was acceptable and you learn from it, then maybe at the start they wouldn't have tried to hide that initial, and that happens in programs all too often.
It does, doesn't it? You can, and you'll get this, you can sense it sometimes if you go into something. Then you get a sense of the fact that there's a bit of a cover up there, because actually nobody wants to say it's going south. I've sat in rooms and you just go, so you're saying that's green, you're saying that particular aspect is green, so tell me why you think it's green. And actually you end up coming out going, well, it's amber or sometimes red. But nobody likes putting amber and red on a classic report, and you just go, if it's all green, there's something wrong. I know there's something wrong. That's a red flag to me.
No, I agree, absolutely. And the other part of it is that I use it all the time to get the sponsors and the leaders focused upon the right areas. So I'll drop a red in. Might not be red, might be amber. It's certainly not green. But it might not be red. But if I put a red in, I know I'm going to get attention. Focus. So you can use it to your advantage, but all too often people are scared of putting red in. So I can't remember who it was now. I think it was Richard Kerr a few weeks ago. He was talking about He calls it the watermelon approach. Green on the outside and red on the inside. As soon as you cut it open, it goes red. And I thought that's a really great analogy as well.
I like that one. That's a really good analogy. But yeah. Right. But again, you're back to that failure thing, aren't you? Because if you put a report in front of your sponsor that's got amber or red on it, I mean, I've seen sponsors just freak out because actually it's almost saying your project is failing. That's the message that is then received. It's not actually the intention, but it's the reception of it. And then you end up in a defensive situation. And you're back to that failure culture again of failure is wrong. And actually, well, amber's a good thing because you can do something about it.
Yeah.
Red's a good thing because you can do something about it. If it's all green, then there's probably trouble ahead.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And sometimes it's right just to stop and reflect.
Yeah.
Because you might end up going down the completely wrong path.
Yeah.
And you know, it might all be green, but you probably won't end up where you want to get to.
Yeah, that's very true.
So you using your red and your ambers as ways of just stopping and checking is a good approach.
Yeah.
So one of the questions we tend to ask a lot is around sort of managing stress, because you know, as we've said already, transformation and change can be stressful for people that are receiving that change, but also stressful for the people that are leading it. So what do you do to alleviate any stress that you feel?
My absolute favorite thing is walking, because you know, the number of times I've gone for a walk with my husband and we've walked and talked, and it might not be about what's going on at work, it might be about something else, but just that act of walking and talking either about something completely different, so you take your mind off it, or you talk through the problem, and actually just externalizing it helps. That's one of my favorite things. Music I find brilliant. You know, it's just, if you're in a bit of a mood, if you're feeling a bit stressed, if you're feeling a bit down, then you choose the right level of, you know, either, you know, high energy or easy listening, and put that on, and that changes my mood enormously, and it's so powerful. And also like a bit of gardening. So yesterday I was out in the garden digging the weeds, sort of going, why are these weeds so fast? But it's quite cathartic. So I'll put a podcast in, do some personal development through my ears, and do some gardening at the same time. So I get two things done. So yeah, they're probably the three top things that I do to get through the stressful times.
Yeah, and all of those are just taking you out of the environment that you're in out there and giving you some space and some time of reflection. And and as you say, doing something to change your emotional state. And those are the key lessons, I think, on anything. Any stressful event is just a point in time, isn't it? And if you can extract yourself from that and just give you a bit of time and a bit of space, you can usually find a way through, and that's seems to be the common theme when we ask that question, actually. So we always end the podcast with the question about your one takeaway in terms of change and transformation. If you could only do one thing, or if you could only provide one bit of advice to the listeners, what would that one piece of advice be?
It would be engage people right from the start and all the way through.
Brilliant. Perfect way to end. Thank you very much, Jacqui. It was a really good conversation, and we occasionally get questions. Are you happy if I collate them for you to answer anyone?
Of course.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers, Tony.
Thank you, Jacqui. Once again, that was a great session, a great podcast. Really delighted that you were able to join us. One of the things I've just taken from there is your comment about red is good because you can always do something about it. So let's take that as a key lesson from today's session, and not worry when we have to record something as red on the next program, because we can always do something about it. For those of you who haven't already investigated the Transformation Leaders Hub, please do so. It's a community for project, programme, change and transformation people. Equally, if you need support in delivering your change programmes, TLH provides you with direct access to a large group of really experienced individuals. Irrespective of whether you need someone to join you permanently, on a contract, or provide some short-term consulting support, you will never have to pay any intermediary fees. A real game changer in my opinion.